Most conflicts between parents and children don't begin due to a lack of love. On the contrary, the problem typically arises precisely from an excess of misunderstood and misdirected love. The desire to protect, help, or guide can over time transform into demands, intrusion, or control. And thus gradually silences, distances, and misunderstandings emerge within the family itself. Sigmund Freud, master of understanding the human psyche and family dynamics, said more than a century ago, "In a home where harmony reigns, there is no place for shouting or for the silence of resentment." He wasn't a politician, a general, or a wealthy man. He was a thinker, a profound observer of human behavior. His mission was simple yet powerful: to bring order to the chaos of relationships, starting at home. For him, the greatest conflicts aren't resolved with rules or rigidity, but with kind attitudes, consistency, and respectful presence. One shouldn't try to shape twisted wood with a hammer, but with fire and patience. This wisdom that has crossed generations remains relevant today. Many parents feel that their children have changed, that they've grown distant, that they no longer listen. But Freud invites us to change our perspective. What if we take the first step? Perhaps the problem isn't what our children do, but how we react to it. Perhaps peace is closer than it seems. The wise person doesn't fight against the river, they learn to swim with the current. Today we will follow in the footsteps of this master and reflect together on a timeless truth. The only way to avoid conflicts with our children is to find within ourselves the willingness to love in a lighter, freer, wiser way. And on this journey, you may discover that it's never too late to restart your relationship with those who matter most to you. Sigmund Freud was born in an era of intellectual transformation when traditional family structures were being questioned and society was evolving rapidly. From a very young age, he observed adult behavior and realized something that deeply concerned him. Conflicts within the home were a reflection of the external world. Where there was disorder in the family, there was disorder in society. He grew up with modest means, experienced significant family relocations in his youth, and was raised with intellectual rigor. He worked as a neurologist, documenting cases, studying the workings of the human mind, and helping people understand their deepest anxieties. But his true interest was always elsewhere, understanding why people distance themselves, hurt each other, and lose each other even when they love each other. Over time, he began to teach what he learned, first to small groups, then to entire communities, and finally to leaders who sought his guidance. But what he valued most weren't the halls of academia, but conversations in his consultation room with ordinary people, with mothers and fathers who simply wanted to live in peace with their children. By the age of 45, he was already considered one of the great thinkers of his time, and yet he maintained his simple habits. He would walk at sunset, reflect deeply, prepare his own meals, and make listening his most treasured profession. He never considered himself the master of truth. He preferred to ask questions rather than give answers. He preferred to maintain silence before speaking. One of his patients once asked him, "Dr. Freud, why do you never try to control your daughter Anna with firmness?" And Freud responded, "Because it is not with force that one educates a heart, it is with example." He believed that the role of parents changed over time. When children are young, we have to guide them. When they grow up, we have to trust them. And when they become adults, our duty is to be available without invading, to love without imposing. Freud didn't seek disciples, but he attracted thousands. He didn't seek recognition, but was honored by generations. He didn't found a religion, but inspired a way of life. His biography is not limited to titles or positions. It translates into the transformations he provoked. People who learn to listen, to dialogue, to loosen the reins with wisdom. Entire families who rediscovered harmony simply because they began to see their loved ones with more respect and less control. And with this spirit, we continue this reflection, because like him, we can all discover that true power doesn't reside in controlling, but in understanding. Freud's routine was marked by simple, almost silent gestures. He would rise early before sunrise and begin his day with a moment of introspection. He would sit at his desk, observing the movement of his collection of antiquities, the distant sound of the bustling Vienna streets, the first signs of life awakening around him. He carefully prepared his own coffee. He chose the beans with care, heated the water patiently, and served himself each cup as if it were a small ritual. He said that this moment was necessary to calm the spirit and prepare the heart to listen. During the day, he walked through quiet parks or sat on a bench under an ancient tree. There he received ordinary people, tired fathers, worried mothers, confused young people. He did not place himself above anyone. He offered listening, presence, and questions that invited reflection. When a father complained that his son no longer obeyed him, he didn't give orders. He simply asked, "Have you been talking or listening? Have you been demanding or inspiring?" In the evenings, Freud would retreat into silence, read scientific journals, write brief notes, and often simply observe the patterns of his thoughts. For him, every everyday gesture had value. The way one served oneself at the table, put on shoes, or greeted a neighbor reflected the state of one's soul. Freud believed that wisdom did not reside in grand speeches, but in small attitudes repeated with awareness. He said that serenity begins at home, in the way we live day to day, in how we react to others' words, especially those of our children. He didn't preach a secluded life, but an attentive one, a life in which every detail reveals something about who we are, a life in which one learns, not in haste, but with presence. This is how he taught, not by imposition, but by example. And many followed him, not out of obligation, but out of inspiration. The true impact of Sigmund Freud was not measured in material achievements, but in the transformation of human relationships. His teachings spanned centuries because they weren't tied to a specific era or culture, but to something essential, the way we treat one another. In life, Freud did not seek fame. Even so, his advice was heard by politicians, artists, business people, and ordinary families. He didn't offer quick solutions, but a new way of seeing life, a path of balance, respect, and listening. Instead of confrontation, he taught to seek understanding. Instead of rigidity, he valued flexibility. Instead of control, he spoke of trust. If we cannot maintain harmony in our home, how can we expect the world to be at peace? He often said. His legacy was transmitted orally, collected by his students in texts that would later form the basis of Freudian psychology. These texts shaped the thinking of generations and influenced educational, political, and family systems in various civilizations, especially in the West. But his true contribution resides in the everyday lives of those who apply his philosophy. Parents who, instead of demanding obedience, opt for dialogue. Mothers who change criticism for understanding. Grandparents who offer presence instead of pressure. Families who realize that respect is not imposed, it is earned through example. Freud believed that the most effective education begins with behavior. He said that children observe much more than they listen, and that parents' actions are like seeds. One day, they will bloom in their children's lives. Thousands of people have found comfort in his words. Many others have completely changed their way of relating to their families. To this day, his name is associated with wisdom, not because he taught too much, but because he taught what was essential. Sigmund Freud left us something more than beautiful phrases. He left us a path, a model of life in which love is expressed with kindness and authority is built on mutual respect. A silent but profound legacy, like the root of a tree that supports the entire family. Over the years, Freud realized something that books didn't teach. Even those who tried to live ethically and with discipline faced conflicts within their own homes. Parents and children united by deep bonds often fell out of love because of harsh words, bad advice, or unmet expectations. He began to observe more closely the families around him. He realized that the greatest frictions arose when parents refused to accept that their children had grown up. They wanted to continue deciding for them, guiding their every move, having opinions about everything. On the other hand, children wanted to be recognized as adults but didn't always know how to express it respectfully. Freud realized that in many cases, it wasn't the absence of love that caused the distance, but the way that love was exercised, a love that suffocated instead of embracing, a care that limited instead of protecting. From these observations, he began to develop simple but transformative principles. They weren't commandments, they were advice born from experience, words that served more as a mirror than a rule. and so he organized what he called the pillars of harmony between parents and adult children. A set of attitudes that, practiced with sincerity, have the power to prevent the most common conflicts and restore peace within the family. Freud taught that parents' presence should be like the shade of a tree, welcoming but without blocking the light. Many parents believe that by always being available, they are demonstrating love, but over time this constant presence can become a burden for children seeking autonomy. True support is that which offers security without imposing a direction. Being available, yes, but without insisting. Listening, yes, but not invading. The oak is strong because it knows how to stand firm against the wind. The wise parent is one who knows how to take a step back so that their child can grow with firmness. Also, when your child knows they can count on you, but also feels they have the freedom to make their own decisions, the relationship strengthens. Supporting is not monitoring. Loving is not controlling. It's allowing the other person to walk, even if they choose a path different from what you imagined. If this reflection has been meaningful to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What has been your greatest challenge in parenting or in your relationship with your own parents? Share a moment when stepping back actually brought you closer to someone you love. Your story might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. And if you're finding value in these psychological insights, hit that subscribe button and join our community of thoughtful individuals seeking deeper connections. Unlike other channels that simply ask for likes, I'm genuinely curious about your personal experiences with these principles. How has giving space to your loved ones transformed your relationships? Let's create a conversation that goes beyond the usual engagement requests. Your unique perspective matters here. One of the greatest difficulties parents have, according to Freud, is seeing their child as an adult. They grow up, form families, make decisions, but in their parents' eyes they remain the same boys and girls from years ago. Freud said that we must update our affection, recognizing that just as time changes the seasons, maturity changes roles. Whoever treats the river of adulthood as if it were a puddle will be dragged by its current. Respecting adult children means granting them the right to make mistakes, to choose, and to disagree. It doesn't mean distancing oneself, but adjusting how one relates to them. Instead of constant advice, leave space for conversations. Instead of orders, humble suggestions. When children feel respected as adults, it becomes easier for them to approach. A parent's authority doesn't reside in maintaining control, but in inspiring trust. Freud often saw parents interfering in their children's parenting, and then grandparents interfering in the raising of their grandchildren. He believed that grandparents' role is not to replace parents, but to support them with wisdom and discretion. The fruit must ripen in its own time. The tree that gives shade must not want to control the direction of the sun. Often, grandparents' good intentions, criticizing methods, imposing routines, or offering unsolicited advice, end up generating silent frictions. Freud taught that the best gift grandparents can give is a light presence and emotional support. Being close to their grandchildren, playing, teaching, yes, but respecting the parents' boundaries. Interference, even out of love, can weaken bonds. Respect, on the other hand, creates lasting and healthy ties between generations. According to Freud, the value of what is given is not in the quantity, but in the intention. When a parent offers financial help expecting obedience in return, they turn the gesture into a tool of control and inevitably break trust. The gold that imprisons is crueler than the absence that liberates. Offering support is noble, but conditioning it on children's behavior or decisions is risky. Adult children need to feel respected, not bought. Help only becomes a bond when it comes with freedom. Freud believed that parents should give what they can without expecting submission. For him, the greatest inheritance was the example of dignity and generosity. Giving, when done lightly, generates gratitude. When done demandingly, it generates distance. Freud observed that many family conflicts arise from the insistence on being right. He taught that in most situations, it's not the truth that destroys harmony, but the way it's imposed. Do you prefer to be right or to be at peace? Yielding is not always a sign of weakness. In many cases, it's a sign of maturity. Children will not always think like their parents, and that's okay. Coexistence requires listening, patience, and above all, humility. Accepting that the other thinks differently is giving space to dialogue. The pursuit of understanding is worth more than the desire to win an argument. Love, Freud said, survives better in environments where no one has to prove they're always right. One of Freud's most repeated lessons was to respect children's romantic choices. Parents don't always approve of whom their children choose to share their lives with, but judging in this case rarely helps. Another's heart is sacred ground. Don't tread on it with feet stained by prejudice. Freud didn't ask parents to like all their children's partners. He asked them to respect them, especially when there were no concrete reasons for distrust or rejection. Coexistence can be difficult at first, but respect makes things easier. When a child feels they have to hide or justify their love, the relationship with their parents becomes more fragile. Acceptance is not blind approval. It's understanding that each person has the right to build their own story, and parents at that moment should be a support, not an obstacle. Freud deeply valued listening. He said that truly listening is one of the greatest expressions of affection. Many parents listen only to respond, correct, or advise, but according to the master, there is a silent power in listening unhurriedly, without interruptions, without judging. When someone speaks, they don't want a verdict. They want to be welcomed. Children, even adult ones, often just want to share something. They don't always ask for advice. Sometimes they just want to feel understood. Freud taught the practice of attentive silence, listening to what's in the words and also what's in the gestures, the eyes, the pauses. When a parent learns to listen without correcting, without rushing, they build a bridge. Through this bridge, many old wounds can begin to heal. One of the most common pitfalls in relationships between parents and adult children is the impulse to give unsolicited advice. Freud said that advice given without being asked for is like a gift given to someone who hasn't asked for it. However valuable it may not be well received. Wisdom also lives in silence. Waiting for someone to ask your opinion is a sign of respect, and often when this space is created, children come on their own. Offering advice lightly, and only when there is openness, makes dialogue deeper. Too much advice can be interpreted as criticism or distrust, even if that's not the intention. The master taught that patience in waiting for the right moment is worth more than the urgency to make your voice heard. This was perhaps one of Freud's most challenging teachings, accepting that children have their own lives with routines, priorities, and decisions that don't always include their parents requires emotional detachment. You created them for the world, not to orbit around you. When children grow up, the relationship must change shape. It's not a question of abandonment, but of evolution. Affection doesn't disappear, it changes. Freud believed that true wisdom consists of letting children fly and continuing to be the safe harbor that will always be there whenever they need to return. When parents accept this reality with serenity, their children return of their own free will, not out of obligation, and this return, free of weight or burden, is much more valuable. Freud believed that true wisdom reveals itself over time. He himself said that at 35 he had established his path. At the age of 47 he was no longer confused, and at 62 he understood what the world of psychoanalysis expected of him. For him, maturity was not an end, but a new beginning, a phase of life in which one no longer has to prove anything, just live with more lightness and discernment. Many people believe that after a certain age it's too late to change, but Freud saw it differently. He said that the most significant changes only occur when haste gives way to reflection and pride to listening. Maturity doesn't bring certainty, it brings silence, and in silence, understanding is born. This philosophy also applies to the relationship with one's children. When they're small, parents have the duty to guide them, but when they become adults, the role changes. Now it's time to trust, respect, and above all, allow them to make their own decisions, even if they differ from what was expected. Freud taught that flexibility is a sign of emotional intelligence. An oak that doesn't bend with the wind breaks in the storm. In the same way, parents who don't learn to adapt to new times and new forms of coexistence end up harvesting distances that could have been avoided. He himself adapted his way of teaching over the years. He began to speak less and listen more, to judge less and ask with more delicacy, to realize that there is not a single truth, but many paths toward understanding. Freud's philosophy is essentially an invitation to continuous change, and he demonstrated with his own life that it's never too late to review attitudes, heal old wounds, and build new beginnings, especially in one's own home. Freud believed that the true transformation of a relationship begins when we stop trying to control the other person and start cultivating peace within ourselves. Only a serene mind can be heard by a child. This phrase summarizes the essence of his teachings. When we speak calmly, without imposing, without demanding, with an appearance of affection, we open space for the other person to truly listen to us. As long as there is respectful silence and kindness, there will be peace in the home. Coexistence between parents and children doesn't depend on always being right, but on knowing how to step back when necessary, on knowing how to listen when everything in us wants to speak. Maturity brings this understanding. Love doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs to be true, firm, and calm like water that borders rocks and never stops following its course. In a small town near a lake lived a carpenter named Reynolds. He never read Freud's texts, nor attended schools or temples. His wisdom was silent, acquired through a simple life, marked by hard work and attentive observation of nature and people. Reynolds had 3 children. They all grew up, married, and went to live in different cities. For many years, he remained in the same wooden house surrounded by old trees, with a small workshop attached to the back. He didn't write letters, didn't make requests, didn't demand visits, but curiously, his children and grandchildren were always around. Every weekend, someone would appear. Sometimes they all brought food, stories, and hugs. His grandchildren ran to him even when it was raining and fought for a place beside him on the wooden bench facing the lake. A neighbor, curious about this unusual loyalty, asked him, "What's your secret? What have you done to make everyone keep coming here year after year?" Reynolds smiled and responded simply, "I've never asked for anything. I just left the door open." He didn't charge for phone calls. He didn't criticize decisions, didn't offer advice no one had asked for. He simply listened, prepared a grilled meal, cut fruit for his grandchildren, and told old stories without the intention of teaching, just sharing. Without knowing it, he was living exactly what Freud preached: the power of calm presence, the value of silent respect, the wisdom of not demanding love, but giving it freely. Reynolds' story shows us that no grand titles or studies are needed to cultivate deep relationships. Sometimes all a child or grandchild needs to return is to feel they'll be welcomed without being judged, just with affection. In the last years of his life, Freud lived even more simply. He spent long periods in silence, walking among the trees or sitting by a lake. His disciples, concerned about the proximity of his departure, asked him for a few last words, an eternal piece of advice, definitive guidance. He smiled and responded sweetly, "Life is a path. Each must follow their own steps. I have only shown that some paths are more serene than others." Freud didn't fear death. He said that the end of life was nothing more than another step, something natural like the falling of leaves in autumn. What really mattered to him was what he would leave planted in the hearts of those who crossed his path. If my words can prevent a parent from hurting their child or a child from moving away from their parent, then I will have lived with purpose. He believed that in the end, what remains are not the orders we gave or the rules we imposed. What remains is the memory of our presence, the way we treated others, the peace or tension we sowed around us. When saying goodbye to the world, Freud didn't leave monuments, but he left something more lasting, a way of seeing family life with less pressure and more compassion. Time passes for everyone. Distances may arise, but affection, when cultivated with respect, remains. And when the end approaches, what comforts us are not the certainties we had, but the bonds we built, without imposing, without demanding, just with the lightness of one who has understood that to love is, above all, to let the other be. The story of Freud's impact extends far beyond the confines of his consultation room in Vienna. Consider the case of the Henderson family, who came to him in 1921 with what seemed an impossible situation. Thomas Henderson, a successful banker, had not spoken to his 28-year-old daughter Elizabeth for 3 years after she chose to marry a musician against his wishes. The silence between them had become a wall so tall that even at family gatherings, they would occupy opposite ends of the room, exchanging not a single word. Mrs. Henderson, torn between husband and daughter, came to Freud in desperation. What happened next demonstrated the power of his approach. Instead of trying to convince Thomas that he was wrong, Freud simply asked him to describe his own father. As Thomas spoke of his father's rigid expectations and how he had rebelled as a young man by entering banking instead of law, as was family tradition, his expression changed. Freud didn't point out the parallel explicitly. He didn't need to. By the third session, Thomas had reached the realization himself. "I've become what I once fled from," he admitted quietly. Within 6 months, Thomas had not only reconciled with Elizabeth, but had formed a genuine friendship with his son-in-law, even funding the small music school they dreamed of opening. This pattern repeated itself throughout Freud's career, not through confrontation but through guided self-discovery. He helped parents see their children as separate beings with valid paths of their own. Another fundamental aspect of Freud's teaching was his insistence on the necessity of emotional honesty. Many parents, he observed, hid behind phrases like, "I only want what's best for you," when in truth they were pursuing what would make themselves comfortable or proud. Freud challenged parents to examine their motives with brutal honesty. Are you objecting to your son's career choice because it's truly harmful to him, or because it doesn't align with the story you've told yourself about who he should become? Are you interfering in your daughter's relationship because her partner is genuinely unsuitable, or because accepting her choice would require you to revise your own prejudices? This self-examination was, in Freud's view, the hardest work a parent could do, but also the most necessary. In his later writings, he explored how parents often unknowingly transfer their own unfulfilled dreams and ambitions onto their children. A father who once dreamed of becoming a doctor pushes his son toward medicine. A mother who sacrificed her artistic pursuits for family responsibilities becomes overly invested in her daughter's musical talent. These projections, while natural, become problematic when they override the child's own inclinations and desires. Freud encouraged parents to distinguish between guidance, which respects the child's developing identity, and projection, which imposes the parent's unfulfilled self onto the child. This distinction became one of his most lasting contributions to family psychology. "To truly see your child," he wrote, "you must first be willing to truly see yourself, with all your unmet longings, disappointed hopes, and abandoned dreams. Only then can you love your child for who they are, rather than for who you wish them to be." As Freud's reputation grew, he was often asked to lecture at universities and psychological associations throughout Europe. In these talks, he frequently returned to a metaphor that resonated deeply with his audiences. "Think of your relationship with your adult child as a dance," he would say. "When they were young, you led and they followed. Now they must sometimes lead, and you must learn to follow." The grace of this new dance depends not on who leads most often, but on how willingly each accommodates the other's steps. This image of parenting as an evolving dance rather than a fixed hierarchy helped many struggling families reimagine their relationships. Rather than seeing their children's independence as rejection, they began to view it as an invitation to a new form of connection. Freud's insights were radical for his time, challenging centuries of patriarchal authority and rigid family structures. Yet he was careful never to dismiss the importance of parental wisdom and guidance. The goal was not to abdicate responsibility, but to transform it. From control to influence, from command to conversation, from expectation to appreciation. Some of his contemporaries criticized his approach as too permissive, warning it would lead to familial breakdown and societal chaos. History has largely vindicated Freud. The families who embraced his principles tended to maintain stronger, more resilient bonds across generations than those who clung to authoritarian models of parenting. Even today, therapists and family counselors continue to build upon his core insight that the healthiest family relationships are those where each member is free to become fully themselves, supported but not confined by the love of those around them. In the decades since Freud's passing, neuroscience and developmental psychology have confirmed many of his intuitions about parent-child relationships. We now know that adolescent brains undergo dramatic restructuring, particularly in areas related to decision-making and risk assessment. This biological reality helps explain why teenagers often seem to reject parental guidance just when parents feel they need it most. Freud, without access to brain scans or neurological data, nonetheless recognized this developmental necessity. He understood that the adolescent's pushback against parental authority isn't primarily rebellion, but rather an essential step toward forming an independent identity. Modern research also validates Freud's emphasis on the power of listening. Studies show that when parents practice what psychologists now call reflective listening, truly hearing children's concerns without immediately jumping to solutions or judgments, several positive outcomes emerge. Children develop stronger emotional intelligence, better problem-solving skills, and perhaps most importantly, a deeper trust in the parent-child relationship. This trust becomes the foundation that allows them to venture into independence while maintaining meaningful family connections. What makes Freud's insights so enduring is their practical applicability across cultures and generations. Consider how his principle of updated affection plays out in today's digital world, where parents must navigate children's online lives without hovering or controlling. The parent who demands access to every text message and social media account often drives communication underground. The parent who acknowledges their child's right to appropriate privacy while remaining available for guidance typically maintains more open communication. Similarly, his warnings about unsolicited advice resonate powerfully in an age when information overload has many young people craving not more direction, but more understanding. Perhaps Freud's most profound legacy is his recognition that the parent-child relationship is not static, but evolving, a living connection that must transform as both parties grow and change. The parent who clings to an outdated model of the relationship, treating a 25-year-old like a teenager or a 35-year-old like a college student, creates tension and distance. The parent who acknowledges each new phase and adjusts accordingly cultivates a relationship that can flourish through every stage of life. This brings us to what might be called Freud's paradox of parenting. The tighter we hold, the further they go. The more freely we let them choose their path, the more likely they are to keep us in their journey. This isn't about abandoning parental responsibility, but about transforming it from control to connection, from direction to dialogue. As one father who had studied Freud's principles put it, "I realized I wasn't raising a child, I was raising an adult-to-be." Everything changed when I started seeing my daughter not just for who she was, but for who she was becoming. Across the world, families who have embraced these principles, sometimes without knowing their Freudian origins, report stronger, more resilient bonds. They describe relationships characterized not by obedience, but by mutual respect, not by obligation, but by genuine desire for connection. In contrast, families that maintain rigid hierarchies and unyielding expectations often find themselves dealing with either open conflict or perhaps more painfully polite estrangement, where contact continues but meaningful connection has been lost. One of Freud's most devoted students, Dr. Eleanor Browning, documented dozens of cases where seemingly broken family relationships were restored through his methods. She tells of a mother and daughter who hadn't spoken for 7 years following disagreements about the daughter's career choice. The breakthrough came not when the mother changed her opinion about the career, but when she changed her approach to the relationship, moving from judgment to curiosity, from disappointment to interest. "I still don't fully understand why you chose this path," the mother eventually told her daughter, "but I'm trying to, and more importantly, I see how it fulfills you." That conversation began a reconciliation that eventually led to one of the closest mother-daughter relationships Dr. Browning had ever witnessed. In another case, a father who had driven away 3 adult children with his constant criticism and control had a realization after reading about Freud's principles of family dynamics. "I've been treating my children like extensions of myself, rather than as separate people," he wrote in his journal. "No wonder they fled." His journey to rebuild these relationships wasn't quick or easy, but it began with this fundamental shift in perspective. As he learned to respect boundaries, offer support without conditions, and truly listen, his children gradually returned to his life, first with caution, then with increasing warmth. By his 73rd birthday, all three children traveled across the country to celebrate with him, a reunion he had once thought impossible. What makes these principles so powerful is that they don't require special training or extraordinary emotional intelligence. They ask only for willingness to reflect on our own behavior rather than focusing exclusively on our children's, willingness to admit when our approach isn't working, willingness to try a different way. The carpenter Reynolds, whom we met earlier, had never read Freud's work, yet he intuitively understood these principles. His door was always open, his judgment always suspended, his presence always available, but never imposed. And so his family gathered around him not from duty but from desire. This is the essence of Freud's teaching on family harmony, creating the conditions where closeness can flourish naturally rather than demanding it as a right. In the end, what Freud offered was not a technique but an orientation, away from control and toward connection. He understood that the deepest human need is not to be directed but to be understood, not to be improved, but to be accepted. When parents can meet this need, even imperfectly, even with occasional missteps, they create a foundation for lasting family bonds. And perhaps most importantly, they model for their children how to create healthy relationships in their own lives. The cycle of control and rebellion that damages so many families can be broken, replaced by a cycle of respect and reciprocity that strengthens with each generation. As we conclude this reflection, it's worth remembering that Freud himself acknowledged the difficulty of these principles. "Nothing worth achieving comes easily," he wrote near the end of his life. "The hardest work is not in understanding what must be done, but in finding the courage to do it consistently." He knew that old habits die hard, that the impulse to direct, correct, and control one's children doesn't disappear overnight. Yet he remained optimistic about human capacity for growth and change. "I have seen the most authoritarian father learn to listen," he noted. "I have witnessed the most critical mother learn to accept. If they can make this journey, anyone can." Perhaps you've recognized yourself in some of these descriptions. Perhaps you've seen patterns in your own family that you'd like to change. The good news is that it's never too late to begin. The journey toward family harmony doesn't require perfection, just willingness, self-awareness, and consistent effort. Small changes in how we respond to our children can, over time, transform the entire relationship. A little more listening, a little less advising, a bit more curiosity, a bit less judgment, slightly fewer expectations, slightly more appreciation. These shifts may seem subtle, but their cumulative effect can be profound. I want to thank you for joining me on this exploration of Freud's wisdom about family relationships. If these ideas have resonated with you, I invite you to become part of our growing community of parents, children, and grandparents committed to building deeper, more authentic family connections. Subscribe to this channel not just for more content, but to join a movement of people who believe in the power of understanding over control, of listening over lecturing, of presence over pressure. I'd love to hear your story too. How has your relationship with your parents or children evolved over time? What turning points have you experienced? What wisdom have you gathered that might help others on this journey? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your insights might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. Remember that we're not just creating content here. We're building a community of support and wisdom sharing that can truly change lives and heal relationships. Every story matters. Every perspective adds depth to our collective understanding. So please, take a moment to share what this video meant to you or what insights you're taking away. And if you found value in these reflections, spread the wisdom by sharing this video with someone who might benefit from Freud's timeless guidance on family harmony. Until next time, may your relationships be filled with understanding, your conversations with genuine listening, and your home with the peace that comes from loving with an open hand rather than a closed fist.